diversity, inclusion, and unconscious bias. And we're in 2019. Those are the three words you hear throughout all of the media streams.
Yeah.
And people say those words in terms of I get it.
Yeah.
But what I'm starting to understand and see, and even hearing you speak during our Martin Luther King breakfast here in San Diego, that there are a lot of people that don't really understand what diversity, inclusion, and unconscious bias is.
Yeah.
So Wineversate and educate us all.
All right. And I love that. Diversity, inclusion, unconscious bias, and I'd add a fourth.
Okay.
Equity.
Equity. Okay.
Okay. So diversity. What we're talking about here is diversity of thought.
So how I think.
Diversity of thought drives innovation. Diversity of thought is core for creativity. Diversity of thought is informed by diversity of experiences. Diversity of experience is fueled by diversity of background. Diversity of background is populated by diversity of people. Right? So we're not talking about check the box diversity. Somebody told me once 90% of who I am you cannot see. Yet we make 90% of our judgments based on the 10% that we do see. Right? So this is about saying, how do I make sure that I have a diverse group of people solving community problems, business problems, education problems, right? Criminal justice problems. And how do I create an environment where people feel safe to bring up that diversity of thought? That's where the inclusion comes in.
Okay.
Inclusion is the culture, right? Diversity is the people.
Okay.
Somebody told me once, diversity is about counting heads. Inclusion is about making heads count.
Wow. I've never even heard that.
No.
I've never heard that.
Right, because we can have two things. We can have people who look different who all think the same. We don't get the benefits of diversity.
Okay.
Right?
And that's true, because when you talk about innovation and you talk about young leaders emerging, and you're talking about fostering different cultures, and even when you're talking about like Wineversations, it's about moving the needle in entrepreneurship, politics, and social justice.
Yes.
And you're touching all of those aspects.
Absolutely.
So the question is, how do you create a culture that involves, like you said, equity, diverse practices, or where does it start? How do you enforce change?
Yeah.
And I know that, or I've read that you've also worked with big name companies to try to implement that change.
Yes.
So talk about some of the companies you've worked with.
So we are one of Honda's 4 national diversity advisors. We work with CBS, Qualcomm, Toyota, the NBA. We work with independent schools across the country. And we work with university presidents, provosts, to create cultures where diversity of thought thrives. So one part of this is, and I'm going to talk about it in 3 ways.
Okay.
One is the individual leaders and the need to build leaders who have the skills, right, to know who they are, right, and to not be threatened, as a matter of fact, to solicit diverse ideas. We say to leaders, if agreement is the currency for inclusion, we're in trouble.
You see it every day.
Right.
You see it every day.
Right.
So what I take from that is self-awareness. Self-awareness of who you are, what you bring to the table, your worth, your value, and how that attributes to you being a leader in an organization.
Absolutely. So inclusive leaders are leaders who are skilled with high levels of emotional intelligence, right? Inclusive leaders are leaders who solicit different viewpoints and perspectives, right? There's some research that shows that diverse teams outperform teams that are more similar in the midterm and the long term. In the short term, the teams that are more similar win because they have a common language, they come to consensus quicker, right? In the midterm, that similar team plateaus, their performance plateaus because they get into groupthink. Diverse teams, trust takes longer to build, right? And people then are using the same words, but they mean different things. Trust is like, can you handle my truth?
Okay.
Do I have to code switch?
Okay.
Or can I bring all of who I am, right? Women in the workplace go, can I be who I am, or do I have to outman the men, right? People in the LGBTQ community go, do I have to stay in the closet, or can I be my full self, right? And so the idea is that when people can bring their full selves into that team, then they bring their ideas, right? Because we're in an innovation economy, right? And so that means the innovative idea is usually the one that's going against the grain, which takes us to culture, which is the second focus. So the leader has to have the skills, then the team has to have the culture, right? Google did a study recently to understand what made its high-performing teams different than the rest. Okay. And they found out that there were 5 key factors that made their high-performing team better and surpass the rest. The number one factor of those 5 was the level of psychological safety.
Wow. Being able to come to work and know that you can do your job and be who you are.
That's it. By 51% of a contributing factor, psychological safety had the difference. We're working with SoCal Edison to help them not only focus on the physical safety of people who are working with live wires, people who are in life and death situations, right? And right next to physical safety, we supported them in adding psychological safety, right? Because if you piss me off,
it's gonna be a problem.
Right? And I pause before you grab that live wire.
Right.
That may be a difference between life and death, right? And so that idea of really saying, I've got to make sure that respect is the foundation for our team. And respect, it's important that respect is not only gained by similarities, right? So that second dynamic is the culture of the team. The third is about power and privilege. That's the equity part, right? We can have diversity, we can have inclusion, and people can be told, stay in your place.
That's true.
Right? People can be told, we're not going to promote you to the C-suite level, right? Gender inequity, right? Men can get paid more than women. Let's say we have both men and women, they're included, but if equity is not there, right, then we have an imbalance of power. So those 3 have to work together in order for companies to leverage the power of diversity and inclusion.
So you talk about companies and innovation in this economy, and you have these big name companies sprouting out. Mm-hmm. And like you said, you hit the gate running and you meet a demand, yes, and then you fall stagnant. Mm. What, in your work with working with those companies, what's an underlying commonality? Yeah. What's the commonality with, the companies that you work with when it comes down to implementing change, the change you want to see to actually create innovation? Yeah,
that's a great, great question. We think a lot about, and that's where the unconscious bias part comes in. We say, if you have a brain, you have unconscious bias. Right? The supercomputer between our ears is processing 11 million bits of data per second. We have the ability to consciously process 40 bits.
11 mil and I only got 40.
And you only got 40.
Okay, so, all right.
That means most of what's going on in our heads is happening outside of our awareness, right? So it's the idea of, to the brain, similarity equals safety. Right? So as we work with these various organizations, people will hire people who are more similar to them. Okay. Right? People will assume that a person that they went to the same university with, right, is more prepared. Okay. Right? People will assume that someone who has a similar hobby than they do, or worked in a similar company that they did before, right? So people will go to their go-to people who are oftentimes, and I'm talking introverts versus extroverts, right? We've got to help people broaden their definition of diversity.
And through personal experience, I've worked in the corporate arena for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. And it was a very eye-opening experience when you talk about the unconscious bias and diversity, because I quickly recognize
Yes.
there were no black women,
Yes.
sitting at the same table, and you feel like you have to put this guard up.
Yes.
You have to manage, in a certain way. You got to work twice as hard. You can't make a mistake.
Yes.
You're also not going to learn. You don't feel like no one connects with you.
Yes.
You can't really share your challenges. And what do you say, or how do you inspire people who are in those positions to be disruptive without ruining your career? How do you do that?
Absolutely.
Well, first off, I think the performance is the base, right? So we've got to be able to make sure that we're skilling ourselves up.
What they call it leveling up now.
Leveling up.
Leveling up.
Right.
What does leveling up look like? What does that look like?
So mentoring programs. I was talking with a leader at Simon & Schuster yesterday, and actually on Friday, and we were talking about this idea of the importance of creating mentoring program and having sponsors, right? And the research shows that mentoring program is like your coach. Having a sponsor is like your agent. Yeah. So sponsors actually help companies get greater diversity at their senior levels, because those are individuals around the table who can bring your name up, right? So one part is the mentoring allows all of us to get coaching on our skills, right? Where we're, and oftentimes the subtleties, right? The nuances of how do you navigate the C-suite, right? How do you navigate unconscious bias and microaggressions and just dumb stuff?
Yes. You get into a role, and how you handle that role, in my opinion, it definitely depicts the culture that you create.
Yes.
And so that's one of the reasons why I'm a business owner.
Yes.
I get to create my own destiny.
Yes.
Win or lose, it's something that I get to cultivate and use my thought process.
Yes.
But I also understand that people aren't willing, like you said, fear.
Yes.
The definitions of fear. So you talk about mentorship, sponsorship, but how do you level up and get everyone on board, including the ones, people who are doubting themselves, to get to that level? Because there's something missing.
Yes.
So there's one part, which is the skill part that we talked about, right? You then connect that person to a mentor to a sponsor. Then you also have to activate and level up the rest of the organization to be able to recognize some predictable patterns that occur that keep the imbalance and the lack of equity. For example, there's some research that shows that when a man makes a mistake, his accomplishments get escalated, and that's what we talk about, and his mistakes get diminished.
Wow.
When a woman makes a mistake, her mistake gets escalated and her accomplishments get diminished, right? And so then that pattern, there's another study that I'm thinking about that shows that the way that we talk about the success and the performance of men and women, for example, are different. When a man is successful, we talk about the skills that he drove the team. He really motivated them. He hit the deadlines, came under budget. What a great leader. When the woman is successful, we talk about the things in the environment that made her successful. Her team really got behind her, right? This was the right project for her. Now, people aren't doing this intentionally, right? But these are some of the patterns in the environment that cause then the person who is skilled to then have to work twice as hard because the cost of making a mistake is going to get escalated.
So I'm trying to dilute the mistake.
I'm trying to dilute the mistake, right? So one part is to level us up so we can perform. The other part is to help folks understand those patterns that play out in the work environment, in our communities, when we're trying to be fair, right? And we can learn and teach leaders these patterns so that they can recognize and interrupt them. And we can do that without blame. We can do that without guilt and finger pointing. And we can do that with saying you are responsible as a leader to make sure you have the skills so that if you see this, when you see these patterns happen, you can recognize it and interrupt it. The other part that we have to do is start talking with our kids about how do they go from K to PhD.
Well, here's the thing. What if PhD isn't in their DNA?
Yes.
What if that's not? I mean, I got a master's degree, and it was like, what's the next step? I've hit a wall.
Yes.
And I recognize that wall and getting that master's degree is what gave me the opportunity to think bigger and create Sip Wine and Beer.
Yes.
And to level up.
Yes.
Because you're introduced to different forms of thinking. But does it have to happen at a PhD level?
Yeah, so good.
Does it? I mean, I know you're Dr. Jones, but that's expensive.
Well, exactly the point.
Expensive.
Somebody told me knowledge is free, education costs.
Yes.
Right? I'm not talking about the literal PhD. I'm talking about my second oldest sister, Brenda, got her PhD from her church. She attended workshops. She taught those workshops. She achieved a level of mastery through her church. My older brother, Alvin, got his PhD at Walmart. For 24 years, he ran Walmart stores and superstores, right? So I'm not talking about duplicating the system that keeps the injustice going. I'm talking about understanding that wisdom is free. Knowledge online, in any bookstore or library, we can access. So we have to also address systems of inequity from a socioeconomic perspective, right? As well as looking at, how are our educational systems teaching students that they are limitless?
Well, I will say this, and first, I thank you for your leadership. Leader is someone you see a brick wall and you're like, walk through it. You're like, well, I'm gonna get to the other side, and I'm gonna trust that I'm gonna get to the other side. And I want to cheers to a couple things. First, your leadership at the Central San Diego Black Chamber has definitely been something that has helped me level up. And I applaud your leadership. I applaud your mission to take others with you.
Yeah.
And I know that people are going to really understand this Wineversation because it's going to resonate with them, and hopefully we have people who level up as a result.
Thank you.
So cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.